Hey guys, sorry about the lack of uploads recently. It's just I've been engaged in a weeks-long and constant battle for my own survival. Now, there is a creature that has been running around my house hunting me, and the good and bad news of the situation is that it looks like a xenomorph. That's the bad side because I'm honestly probably gonna die. But the good side is that I've called up Disney and I said, hey, there's an animal in my house that's infringing on your intellectual property. So they're sending out a lawyer, and once they get here, I should be safe, but I just have to survive until then. Although this whole situation has kind of made me realize that this is the first time in a very long time that I've been afraid of anything even remotely associated with Alien. This is because Alien is a franchise that has done many things during its existence, including making many conversations I've had extremely awkward. I mean, have you ever tried talking to someone who hasn't heard of Alien about Alien? Like you hit them with the, hey man, have you ever seen Alien? And all they can think about is whether you're potentially illiterate or not. But there are some other achievements this franchise has managed to pull together, like the fact that it's about one thing and yet it harbors two completely different fan bases. This is only possible because of the first movie, Alien, and its sequel called Aliens. Both of these movies are pretty different. One follows the crew of a ship named the Nostromo as they're slowly picked off by an alien creature, and the other follows a team of colonial marines and some other characters as they are sent to a lunar colony that's gone dark. One is full of slow burn horror and the other is fast-paced action. One is relatively small scale and the other covers much larger ground. But one thing that stays consistent between these two movies is that they're both very good. Both use the same concepts but in wildly different situations, to the point that a comparison is nearly useless. And that's where the two fan base thing comes in. Some prefer Alien to be more horror-centric, while others prefer pulse rifles, hordes of xenomorphs, and memorable quotes.
Game over, man! It's game over!
And there's absolutely nothing wrong with either of these, but through the years, following the release of Aliens, things began to get a little bit muddy. Some things tried to be horror-focused, but forgot where the horror came from. Others tried to tamper with the balanced atmosphere of Aliens, but only succeeded in making xenomorphs look incredibly weak. The franchise went through a pretty extended spot of turbulence, to say the least, and a lot of content that came out for it was just bland and confused. And I'll just say it, that's not very scary. Also, I don't want to hear any of that.
This guy wasn't even alive when the original came out. Opinion invalidated.
Because it doesn't matter. I grew up during the franchise's awkward years between Alien Resurrection and Prometheus, and I just remember that every time I'd hear about Alien, everyone around me would talk about how it was the scariest movie they'd ever watched. And then when I'd see something about Alien, it was just not the scariest thing I'd ever watched. So from my point of view, Alien lost its whole fear factor a long time ago, and it wasn't until 2014 when that all changed. Because this was the year that a game released which did the impossible. It paid respect to the franchise it was a part of. It had one of the most innovative gameplay elements ever made, and sorry, I just realized I haven't told you the name of the game. In 2014, Alien Isolation was released, and above all its other achievements, perhaps its greatest was making aliens scary again.
And it's back to me, walking down a corridor like it was the most natural thing in the world. I've just had an android report to the APTC with head trauma. But he's covered in blood. We need supplies. Take what you can from whoever you want.
When this job came across my desk, I read the case history. You're still looking, aren't you?
This is Ripley, last survivor of the Nostromo. Signing off.
Hello everybody, I'm B4 Brandos and welcome to my retrospective on Alien Isolation, and this is a very special episode because today we're covering a game that I actually like. I know, shocker boys, today we're covering a game that I think is more fun to play than breakdancing in a pit of broken glass. B4 Brandos is truly evolving as a channel. But jokes aside, this really is a special episode because Alien Isolation is one of the best horror games I have ever played. Like, it's pretty rare for me to pick something up and realize it's it's my favorite anything, let alone a horror game, but Alien Isolation really earns the spot. Like, until I went to make this video, I'd played this game once for the sole reason that I didn't want to keep replaying it and spoiling myself on it. I didn't want to ever get sick of the game. That's how good this thing is. Now, for the uninitiated who aren't familiar with what Alien's all about, essentially this game is a spin-off that takes place between Alien and Aliens, and the game follows Ellen Ripley's daughter Amanda Ripley as she travels to an old trading hub space station where the flight recorder of her mother's ship has apparently been recovered. What Amanda doesn't know, however, is that the people who brought the flight recorder to the station also brought a few other puzzle pieces that relate to her mother's disappearance, and not all of them are as ordinary as a flight recorder. And if you're a fan of Alien and that whole premise just sounds awesome, it's because the developers of the game were fans of the franchise too. And yes, believe it or not, I am about to tell you all about the development of a video game where things went pretty smoothly and a good game came out of it at the end. Pretty much Alien Isolation was made by a game studio called Creative Assembly, whose main experience in making games up until that point was mostly just strategy games. But when 2008 rolled around, they pitched a game based on the Alien franchise to Sega, and in a tech demo put together by a 6-person team, they showed off a game concept where one person would play as a xenomorph and another would play as a human who needed to hide from it. Nevertheless, Sega was interested and greenlit the project, and in one of the smartest moves I've ever seen from a game studio while doing these kinds of videos, Creative Assembly quickly recognized that they weren't cut out for the job.
I don't know what I'm doing! Ah, shit!
Their experience in only strategy games wasn't going to easily translate into making a survival horror title, so they began hiring from other studios like Bizarre Creations, Crytek, BlackRock, Ubisoft, Real Time Worlds. Eventually, the team of 6 ballooned into around 100, and the game increased in scope. And one of the biggest things they wanted to really focus on in this game was making sure that the playable world was as close to the style of the original Alien as possible. And to help them achieve this, 20th Century sent the team 3 terabytes of production material from the original movie. We're talking sets, costumes, music, sound effects. The team even consulted Terry Rawlings, the editor of both Blade Runner and the original Alien, who was able to give them more insight on how the world was meant to fit together, how it would look, how the music would sound in certain situations. And speaking of music, Creative Assembly even deconstructed the soundtrack of the first movie so that they could use different motifs and musical cues that would line up with the original. Overall, they really took the time to focus on the little details. One of Alien's biggest strengths is the incredible world that these stories inhabit, and Creative Assembly understood that. Also, one of my favorite facts that I learned while researching for this video is that the design team followed one single rule, and that was that if they couldn't design a model that looked like it could be made out of just stuff they used for props back in 1979, then they just couldn't make it a model. The art style for the game wasn't going to be about perfecting the original style or reinterpreting it. It was going to just be about replicating that thing down to a T. It's so cool! And yeah, there's not too much more I can say about development. It was boring in a good way because they had a vision, a plan to reach the vision, and they didn't give anything a second thought if it didn't fit the bill. Pretty much everything in the final game that I want to talk about is just something that I'd spoil by talking about the development process. But look, development talk is all well and good, but in a game that is just this damn good, all of the interesting stuff is found within. So, let's dive into Alien Isolation and find out exactly what's happening aboard Sevastopol Station. So our story begins in the year 2137, except it really doesn't. Alien Isolation takes place in this year, but to truly understand the story of the game, we need to turn the clocks back to 2122. A ship called the USCSS Nostromo was returning to Earth when it picked up a distress signal. The crew, made up of Ripley, Darlers, Lambert, Brett, Parker, Kane, and a new crew member named Ash, were awakened from cryosleep to investigate. And heading to the moon the signal was coming from, the crew discover a derelict alien ship, as well as some strange eggs in the cargo hold. Turns out these eggs are actually holding living creatures, and while inspecting one, a facehugger launches out of an egg, latching onto Kane's face. Heading back to the ship, the science officer Ash breaks quarantine procedures to let the crew back on board, much to the protests of Ripley. Except once they're back inside, it seems that was the right move, at least for a little bit, because the facehugger attached to Kane's face ends up falling off and dying. To celebrate, the crew all have a meal together before they go back into cryosleep. However, Kane begins to feel strange and is killed when a chest burster, bursts through his chest. The chest burster then escapes out into the ship, and from here, it's all downhill. The crew tries several attempts to locate the creature, which all end up failing. And what makes it even worse is that every time they see it, the alien has grown even bigger. Eventually, the crew of the Nostromo are whittled down to Ripley, Lambert, and Parker, who decide that the best course of action is to set the Nostromo to self-destruct and escape using one of the lifeboats. However, during the process, Lambert and Parker are killed by the alien, and Ripley has to complete the entire task herself, which she does, escaping to and launching the lifeboat just as the Nostromo goes critical. The big problem is that the alien didn't really like all the noise of the Nostromo and found a nice quiet place to chill out aboard the lifeboat that Ripley just launched. But with some quick thinking, Ripley slides into a spacesuit and opens the lifepod's docking door, sucking the xenomorph out into space. Ripley then records an SOS message and goes into cryosleep, hoping that someone will find her as she drifts through the galaxy. And that was Alien 1, although some very important details that I didn't mention yet were the fact that the science officer Ash is revealed to be a synthetic following orders from the company, a corporation that's otherwise known as Weyland-Yutani. See, Weyland-Yutani actually knew about xenomorphs way before the movie took place and set something up called Special Order 937, where if an alien life form were detected, all synthetic units would drop their duties and act to safely bring the sample to the company. In the Nostromo's case, their encounter with the derelict wasn't an accident. Weyland-Yutani had picked up a distress signal from the planet and realized that it was alien in origin. That's why they quickly replaced the onboard science officer with their own synthetic one. But yeah, overall, the events of Alien only happened because of Weyland-Yutani and their desire to get their hands on a weapon as dangerous as the xenomorph. But there's also another side to the story, because while we, the audience, know what happened to the Nostromo and Ripley, there was someone back home that didn't. And this person was 10-year-old Amanda Ripley. Now, Amanda had gotten used to her mother going away for long periods of time. She had gotten used to her neglectful stepfather Paul, but this trip was different. Instead of being gone for a couple months or a year, her mother was going to be gone for 2 years on a job that would bring them more than enough money to get them into something resembling a better life. And although she wasn't happy with this, her mother promised her that she would be back by her 11th birthday. But her 11th came and went in a flash. Ellen never showed up, the Nostromo never showed up, and eventually they received news from Weyland-Yutani that the ship had gone missing. This crushed Amanda. It wasn't that her mother was dead, it wasn't that her mother missed her birthday, it's that there was simply nothing. The ship, the crew, her mother, all seemingly vanished without a trace. This was a loss that followed Amanda through her teens and into her adult life. She became aimless, consumed with finding the truth, and although she told herself that she had become numb to the loss, she still wound up working a low-level engineering job in the sector that her mother disappeared, just in case any news came up. Amanda turned into a woman who never truly started living. Although she grew callous and angry and believed she didn't care anymore, there was still a part of her that was waiting for someone to walk through the door and tell her that her mother was alive. Tell her that they had finally found her.
Ripley? I'm Samuels. I work for the company. It's about your mother. We think we may have found her, Amanda.
So the game starts with company exec Samuels approaching Ripley. He tells her that a salvage vessel named the Anisadora has recovered the flight recorder of the Nostromo and has taken it to a space station called Sevastopol. Samuels offers Ripley a spot on the recovery team, and while she's initially reluctant, he wins her over by offering her the one thing she's been waiting for her whole life: closure.
When this job came across my desk, I read the case history. I know why you're working in the region where she went missing. You're still looking, aren't you? I've been cleared to offer you a place on the Torrents if you want to come along. Maybe there'll be some closure for you.
And that's apparently more than enough reason to set off to Sevastopol, because in the next sequence we wake up from cryo sleep aboard the Torrens, and heading to the bridge we meet up with the flight recorder's 2 other recovery team members, Weyland-Yutani legal rep Taylor, and of course Samuels. And this is the exact point when the recovery mission stops going to plan, because as the Torrens approaches Sevastopol, the crew realize that it's been damaged, and trying to hail the station, they don't get much in return.
We request immediate permission to transfer the passengers port side over.
So with the station's dry dock destroyed, the crew decide that the only option they have is to do a spacewalk, and heading out, their plan is quickly turned upside down when a piece of the station snaps their line. Ripley ends up being the only one that is able to hold on though, and alone she drags herself into the airlock. And this is finally where we begin the gameplay. Yeah, I know, in an Alien Isolation retrospective, it's taken us this long to get isolated. I'm sorry guys, I'm a retrospective YouTuber, I can't write short and snappy things. But getting changed out of our EVA suit, we begin to explore the station, and yeah, it's clear that something isn't right here. The hallways are empty and full of damaged systems, pipes are burst, the entire structure rattles and groans constantly. And it's not just the back areas that are affected, because making our way to the station's space flight terminal, the biggest population hub on Sevastopol, it's just as empty. Shop shutters are closed, graffiti lines the walls, and in a nearby restaurant we can even find an audio log made by a reporter, and in it we can hear that the Colonial Marshals, aka Sevastopol's police force, have been the topic of some extreme ridicule, especially their leader, Marshal Waits.
But instead of the answers we wanted, he continued to be evasive, and after only a few minutes, he and his team were pelted by projectiles from an angry crowd. A gun was fired, there was panic, and now Waits and what's left of his team are forcibly ejecting us from the terminal. Feels like we're on our own now.
Also, yes, you can bet your bippy that I'm going to be dissecting every little bit of Sevastopol's political problems later in the video, because this game has audio recorders. Like, if you've watched this channel for any amount of time, you'd know that if the game has audio logs, I'm loving it. Like, some people play games for gameplay. I play games so I can do nothing and stare at an audio recorder for 10 hours. But moving on, we eventually find a sign of life, or at least previous life, when we come across a dead body, and grabbing a crowbar or something off of him, the player gains the ability to dismantle locks they come across, or just between you and me, dismantle human skull. But after trying out the unlocking feature of the tool, Ripley gets caught off guard by the least angry Scottish man in the universe.
Stay still.
Okay.
Now turn around. Come on!
I'm Ripley.
Where'd you come from? Ripley?
A ship.
There's no ships here. Something blew just now. Rocked this whole place. Something's on this station. Something you wouldn't believe. A killer. You get it?
I was boarding with 2 colleagues. We got separated by the blast. Can you help me find them?
Why?
Because you seem to know your way around.
I mean, why? What's in it for me?
Go find a fucking job, you fucking sausage roll looking twat.
The man introduces himself as Axel, and Ripley convinces him not to shoot her by promising him a way off the station, as long as he can help her contact the Torrens. So with an uneasy alliance forged, the two set off to begin the tutorial. And one of the cool things about this segment is that most players won't even recognize that it is a tutorial, just because of how sneakily they kind of shoved in all these little lessons. Pretty much Axel is a character that's only in the game to teach us the dynamic of Sevastopol. First we run into 2 survivors who Axel immediately sticks up. We learn here that there are still people around, but they are paranoid, distrusting, but overall not dangerous. Next we stop by Axel's hideout, where we get a flashlight that you need to find batteries for, and we also learn to use the crafting system just in time to run into some more survivors. Except these guys are on the opposite side of the coin from the other people we ran into, because they are still paranoid, but they are also heavily armed and ready to kill to gain supplies.
Keep your guns tight. Shoot anyone you don't know.
Together with Axel, we manage to sneak past, but while having some problems with some door controls, another survivor shows up and attacks Axel. In response, we run over and attack him with the tool we found. Here, we learn that this will be a game where you can defend yourself, and Axel doubles down on that fact by executing the survivor. And this gets Ripley rattled, because after all that learning, she still doesn't get that
This is about survival.
So in one last heroic action, Axel teaches us the final and most important lesson that we need to know about Sevastopol. And that lesson is, none of that shit you just learned matters. You can sneak around, you can avoid humans, you can defend yourself if you get into a fight, but that's just basic survival. What the game says with this cutscene is a transmitted feeling that the developer wanted you to feel. They wanted you to be sitting there just thinking, holy shit, the guy that taught me everything I know and has been doing this for an entire month just died, and he couldn't do anything to prevent it. I'm fucked. And that's the exact train of thought that just keeps rolling around in your mind, because whether you're immersed in this game or not, by this point, you now 100% know you are not ready to survive an encounter of the third kind, which is what makes the end of this level so great, because after Axel dies, we make it to a transit hub calling a train car, and during the sequence, nothing happens, but that's kind of the point. As the train car approaches, it becomes harder and harder to figure out what's the squeal of metal scraping against metal and what's the shriek of the thing that just killed our only ally on the station. But eventually the train car does show up and we board it, taking us to the next level. Now the next level, called Encounters, is all about putting what you learned into action by yourself. And leaving the transit terminal, we run into another survivor who takes some shots at us before running off. And moving over to see what she was doing, we find a hacking tool, although the battery is burned out. The survivor then returns with the rest of her group, and in order to evade them, we head down some stairs where we find, holy shit, is this a... It is! We find an actual weapon, an actual gun, a revolver. Just personally, with first-person shooter games, one of my favorite little pleasures that you can get from them is finding new weapons, but Alien Isolation, I've got to say, it's probably my favorite gun pickup ever, because I didn't know anything about this game prior to my first playthrough, except that the alien does the whole scary thing really good. But I also thought it was just going to be Outlast in space, and this entire moment just changed that for me. Now, as for how guns actually work in this game, I'm not going to be talking about it until later in the video, just because the role that guns play in the combat of Alien Isolation is really unique when compared to other first-person horror games, and we need to really build up our arsenal before we can actually talk about any of that stuff. And we'll also be talking about it later because something more important comes up when we stumble into Sevastopol's archive room, which is holding the one and only flight recorder of the US CSS Nostromo. But strangely, after approaching the recorder, Ripley finds it completely blank, with all the information that was on it either missing or corrupted. However, Ripley doesn't have much time to feel sorry for herself as the archive room locks down, forcing us to look around until we find some replacement parts for our hack tool. And this unlocks our second way of, well, unlocking things around the station, because after refitting the tool, we can override the security door, letting us leave the archive. And heading back to the entrance, Ripley tries to disable the alarm, but gets interrupted by a Hollywood celebrity that some of you might have seen before. Now, it's actually pretty funny because at this point, the player fully believes that the xenomorph is hanging around, but as long as you don't make too much noise, you're actually pretty safe. The game only wants you to know that shit is starting to get real, and it shows you that in a pretty clever way, because heading back out into the room that we ran out of, we find that the xenomorph has found the people that were looking for us. And man, I just love this part, because have you ever played a game and come across two NPCs just fighting, and you can't help but just sit back and watch? It's just so cool watching two NPCs react to each other. I feel like I could bet money on this. But this sequence is really cool for a few other reasons, because the NPCs the Xenomorph are attacking are pretty much you. Both these guys have revolvers, they have double the firepower of you, and they both fucking die. It's just such a swift like kick in the nuts, because 5 minutes ago the player was downstairs just celebrating about having a revolver, and then the alien shows up and the player's all scared, but it's okay because they've got a gun, right? And then literally the next thing the game does is show them two people with revolvers dying. The whole thing is just like a little gauntlet to show you how absolutely powerless you are. This thing is bulletproof, bro. Also, I personally learned here that the game wasn't just putting on a show for me. This wasn't just some scripted sequence meant to hold my hand and tell me not to shoot the Xenomorph. No, this thing is a completely independent NPC, and as far as he was concerned, the goober standing slack-jawed on the balcony was just as on the kill list as the other guys. Like, do you want to know what pure dread feels like? Watch this clip. But moving on, in a world where I didn't die, we sneak past the alien and make it to an elevator that takes us to Mission 4. And Mission 4 is a relatively short one, mostly because the alien is just gone for the whole thing. It's like the game is just apologizing for throwing it at us. But the mission is a nice break, because it shows us that not everything on this station wants to kill us. Some want to help us, like Working Joes.
Hello? My name's Ripley. Amanda Ripley. I need your help.
Please take a seat. Someone will be with you shortly.
The only problem is that they are absolutely useless in an emergency, and I think that now that we're meeting them for the first time, it would be a good point to talk a little bit about Sevastopol Station, because the Working Joes, the station, and the company that owns them both can all be connected by one single word, and that word is cheap. See, Sevastopol Station is owned by a company called Seegson. They were founded in Europe in 2034 and were attempting to compete with Wayland Corp, the biggest company, well, ever. The only problem was that Wayland Corp had its fingers in everything. They worked in robotics, space travel, medicine. The list expands into pretty much listing every industry ever. But the point is that Seegson, which at this point was still named Seeg and Son, simply didn't have the ability to match Wayland Corp's level of technology. So they went down a route that Wayland hadn't. They began producing faster than light engines that were for sale to any company that wanted them, unlike Wayland, where all their best tech was used on their own projects. This move brought the company the success that they had been looking for, and they changed their name, becoming the massively successful Earth-based corporation named Seegson. But this still wasn't enough, because in the lore of Alien, one of the big things that's going on around the time of the first movie is space mining. And yes, this is exactly what it sounds like. You go to a planet, you set up a mining facility, a terraformer, and every once in a while, a ship like the Nostromo comes along and takes what you've mined back to Earth. In fact, this is literally what the Nostromo was doing during the first movie. The big asterisk following that entire sentence, however, is that the only company rich enough to really do any of this is Weyland-Yutani. But money talks, and the more that Weyland-Yutani shipped in its monthly $5 billion worth of cargo, the more that other second-tier corporations slowly went, I wonder if I could do a bit of that. Doesn't even look that hard. And thus the bargain bin corporation space race commenced, with every company worth over $50 trying to figure out how they could turn their bit of space into a couple $1 billion. And what Seegson ended up settling on was Sevastopol Station, an orbital platform that once served as a free-port trade center between Earth and the Outer Rim. However, the previous owners couldn't make it profitable and had to give it back to the Space Bank. And no, I'm not kidding, by the way. Sevastopol was built by a banking corporation called GeoFund Investor, who knew full well that corporations were looking for a way to get one foot in space. Although I do like the idea that the existence of a space bank also implies that you can get your stuff repoed by said space bank. I mean, can you imagine exploring a new planet and then your ship just gets hijacked by some intergalactic repo man just because you missed a repayment? Anyways, I'm getting off track, sorry. Eventually, Seegson bought Sevastopol from GeoFund for a few reasons. For one, the station could act as a fantastic production spawn point for their new working Joe synthetics. And for 2, Sevastopol also orbited a gas giant called KG-348. And this giant produced gases that were considered to be pretty valuable to a company that wanted to get into space mining. So this wasn't just some random purchase so that Seegson could get into space, it was an actual calculated plan. Seegson saw an opportunity with the station: build robots, make money, figure out how to use Sevastopol to mine the gas giant, make more money. It seemed really simple. Seegson, however, made one massive mistake, and it's kind of sad because they couldn't really help it. You know, it's in their DNA, and that big pitfall was being cheap. And when I say it's in their DNA, I'm serious. Like, they started life trying to be a competitor to Weyland-Yutani when they absolutely knew they could not afford to be a competitor to Weyland-Yutani. Also, guys, I know that this whole lore section is a lot of this corporation did this, that corporation did that, but look, if you've been overrun by brain rot and you need like a bit of a funny, just think of the whole situation as that ant meme, right? And the caption is how it feels when you want to be a Weyland-Yutani competitor, but you don't want to spend money. But anyway, Weyland-Yutani had been creating synthetics for decades at this point, and if you subscribe to the belief that Blade Runner and Alien are in the same universe, then the creation of an artificial workforce has been an industry goal for well over a century. But Weyland-Yutani, as usual, created the best product. But for once, this wasn't really the best move. Wei created such lifelike synthetics that they freaked people out. I mean, they could even simulate emotions. And with this split opinion on synthetics, Seegson saw an opportunity. And with this opportunity, they created the Working Joes. Synthetics advertised to be all that the Weyland models couldn't. They couldn't simulate emotions, they didn't look like humans, they were simply the basic concept of the synthetic boiled down to its most pure form. But that's just advertising. As we've learned so far, Seegson is nothing but frugal, and the Working Joes were really just their way of entering the synthetic market in the cheapest way possible, while positioning themselves as a competitor to the biggest game in town. The big issue is that you can say you've done something bad on purpose, but when the thing is actually bad, then no amount of slogans are gonna save you. Like, Seegson's Working Joe sales line is, "You always know a Working Joe," but it's just major cope because they're only saying this because Working Joes look like shit, and Seegson tries to advertise it as, "We're only doing this because Weyland-Yutani makes their robots look too real." Also, a little skip ahead, there's a part later in the game where you find a showroom for Working Joes, and there are just 0 bookings. Like, no one wants these things. And it's because of the commercial failure of the Working Joes and Seegson's failure to figure out how to mine the gas giant that around a year before the game, the corporation decided to decommission the platform or sell it, whichever came first. And that's going to be enough lore for now, because at the moment I just wanted to get you acquainted with the history of Sevastopol so we can truly begin to actually talk about how it got to the state it's in now. Even before it had an alien problem, Sevastopol was still a backwater station that no one wanted and was run by a company that hadn't been successful for decades. It's really cool information to have, because even on Weyland-Yutani vessels in a lot of alien media, they just look like shit. And this is meant to be the biggest, most high quality production company in the universe. So it's really cool to kind of see these second-rate corporations and what happens when they try their hand at space colonization. But anyway, I gotta stop myself because we're gonna talk about it later, you know, once we get past the 4th level out of this 19 level game. But back at level 4, we explore around a bit and we end up finding a motion tracker. Yeah! And this is just why I love this game. The devs just read people. Like, you find this tracker and your first thought is, oh hey, I've seen this before, I bet I can track the alien. And then literally the first time you bring it up, there is movement right behind you.
Is there a problem?
No problem.
I just love that they give you this new and honestly pretty powerful tool while also showing you how it works, while also telling you that as long as you're on this station, no matter how many gadgets or gizmos you pick up, you're not going to be safe. But yeah, overall, the level doesn't have too much more to talk about, so we'll just continue on through this vent.
To re-establish long-range communications.
You're becoming hysterical.
Get back! I'm warning you!
Tut. Let's resolve this amicably.
Oh my god.
Oh yeah, most of the working Joes on Sevastopol have gone rogue, I should have mentioned that. And that's your answer if you're wondering why I went so in-depth on working Joes. It's because they are a massive enemy in the campaign, and in this level, the game only pulled the Xenomorph back in order to show you that even when it's not around, you're still not safe. Also, I know what you're thinking. You're going like, Brandos, can't you just use the revolver? Yeah, you can. If you have 1,000,000 bullets. Also, yes, this is the second enemy type that you can't shoot with this gun that we've recently acquired. We can't shoot the Xenomorph, can't shoot the working Joes. I hope this is actually getting you more hyped for the combat section of the video where we talk about things you can shoot. But anyway, to get to that next segment, we need to keep going. So continuing on, we make our way to the communications deck and find that Sevastopol's own AI, Apollo, has disabled the communications. And without the ability to restore them, we move on, eventually running into a terminal that none other than Samuels is hailing. As it turns out, Samuels and Taylor survived the spacewalk, but Taylor was seriously injured and needs medical attention. So beginning to head back to the transportation hub, the game once again reminds us that this is an alien game, and we begin hearing noises in the vents all around us. Something eerie here is that if you bring up the motion detector, sometimes you can see motion dots appear around you for just a few seconds before disappearing. The game here is preparing us. It's telling us that it's nearly time for us not just to see the alien, not just to stumble into a room while it's killing some people, not just to hear it crawling around in the vents, but it'll be time to be the one getting hunted by it. And that's the tone of level 5. From the point that you've arrived here, we've been in a bit of a controlled spiral, stumbling from one bad situation to the next. But now things are looking better. We've reunited with Samuels and Taylor, we have weapons and tools. We have a chance. Which really means that the game is about to throw us into a worse situation. And that situation begins with a simple trip into the medical center where we meet a doctor named Kuhlman. Ripley says she needs medical supplies and Kuhlman says that he needs them as well. Saying that he can't make the trip, he explains that she needs to go to the medical center and find the code to the service elevator that will take them down to the dispensary. So lacking options, Ripley agrees to do it. And heading in, it doesn't really seem too bad, you know, apart from everyone being dead, and we find the passcode with relative ease.
Warning. Medical facility quarantine breach detected. Warning.
Relax.
Medical facility
I'm just trying to find out what that is. You focus on finding that keycard.
As we've come to learn in this game, when something's easy, something is wrong. And the thing that ends up going wrong here is that the medical center's quarantine process has picked up something in our area and has locked down the wing. But having what we need, we decide to, you know, just ignore it, you know, just find a way to lift the quarantine and leave because it's probably nothing, right? The Xenomorph has entered the area, and this isn't some chance encounter. This time, it's here to hunt us. And welcome to the reason I named this video what I did, because I wholeheartedly believe that this is the best interpretation of the Xenomorph since the original. Just starting with the looks, it's perfect. The team at Creative Assembly tried to match the original Aliens design as much as possible, but they also added some of their own tweaks. Like for instance, this drone isn't played by a guy in a suit like the first movie, so the team was able to change the entire body to be more alien. The legs have been changed from normal human type limbs to being digitigrade. Digitigrade. Yeah, apparently that's the term for like when you have backwards jointed legs. It sounds like a HDMI cable or something like that. Anyway, digitigrade. The devs said that they did this to allow the Xenomorph to have more of a gallop in its animations. And the non-human elements also let them make the creature much bigger without it looking out of proportion. Apart from that, the tail's a bit longer, but overall, that's really it on the appearance. It's a fantastically designed designed Xenomorph, like one of the best designs I think I've ever seen for the thing. It just looks like the thing, you know? But the looks are kind of besides the point, because the Xenomorph in this game is only remembered for two things, and that's how amazing the AI is, and how that AI makes this one of the scariest video game enemies ever made. And this is because oh no, guys, I'm probably gonna have to find a place to hide. Just give me a second, I'll be back. We'll continue the video in just a moment. I'm just one minute. Where is this guy? Every time I drop into a room, he just miraculously stops making noise and just disappears. Alright, Brandos, if you don't want to be in the same room as me, then I'll stay in the same room as your computer with your script about alien isolation. I'm going to rewrite a section of it. Alright, everybody, before Brandos was about to tell you how scary the alien isolation AI is, but what I'm going to do is tell you how absolutely cool it is. In his voice as well. Obviously for parody reasons, you know, to mock him. It has nothing to do with the fact that I can't do that voice for that long, no. Because the Xenomorph in this game is only remembered for two things, and that's how amazing the AI is, and how the AI makes this one of the most capable video game enemies ever made. This is because the alien runs off a system that could be almost described as being a multiplayer game, which is ironic considering that the game started its life as just being that. But in this system, there are three entities at play. You, the player, the Xenomorph, and then the director. Now, the director is the most important piece of the system because its job is to create a constantly balanced experience while tracking two entities that are making their own choices. The way it does this is by always knowing where the player is and always knowing where the alien is. It then looks at what both of them are doing and crunches the numbers into something called the menace gauge. This is a measurement of how intensely the alien is hunting the player. When it's full, we're looking at situations where you're hiding in a locker with a Xeno hanging around right outside. And when it's empty, the Xenomorph retreats into the vents until the director decides the player has had enough downtime. But don't get me wrong, the alien does have the power to make its own decisions. The devs described it as having a kind of skill tree. At the start of the game, it's not too smart. If it's chasing you and you hide in a locker, it's not going to know where you went. Through the game, the Xeno gains more and more skills to use when hunting the player. This means that if it's chasing you and you run into a room containing exclusively lockers, then it's going to know that you're hiding in one.
Transit service deficient. Please fill out one of the forms provided.
It's really cool because it forces the player into a kind of mental arms race with the Xeno. Every single time it shows up, you need to employ new tactics, otherwise you are going to die. Another cool thing is that the game really enforces that you're not in control here, because in any other game, it would just be you versus the AI. But when you play against the AI in games, it slowly becomes easier and easier to figure out how to manipulate it. And this is where the director comes in. If the alien is just kind of being clowned on by the player, then the director will pretty much just tell the alien which room the player is in. It's not that the director is trying to kill the player, it's that its one job is to keep the menace gauge cycle going so that the player doesn't ever have too easy or too hard of a time. And that's why I think you know, that Xenomorph is surprisingly good at talking about video games. I think I might keep his little segment in the video, in fact, because it actually leads really well into the entire other side of this whole deal, which is the player. Because yeah, I know, it sounds like the cards are really stacked against the player, which they are, which is also kind of the point, but it doesn't mean that we're helpless. See, Ripley is an engineer, so she is pretty smart, and in the game, that character element is translated into the crafting system. Just by grabbing random stuff around the station, we can craft med kits, molotovs, noisemakers, smoke bombs, flashbangs, the list goes on, but obviously, a lot of them can give the player an advantage. Smoke bombs can block lines of sight for enemies, molotovs can insta-kill humans and scare off the alien, flashbangs stun enemies, and noisemakers, Do you need me to tell you what noisemakers do? Really, the player's biggest advantage is that the arsenal of weapons we build up through the game aren't really our best options. It's the wide selection of really useful tools that we can craft on the spot. Also, yes, I know I haven't spoken about the motion tracker, but that's because there's not really much to say. Like, it tracks the alien through the walls and it makes a cool noise. What else do you want me to say? Anyway, overall, the alien AI is pretty incredible. Like, the team at Creative Assembly just had this vision and executed it perfectly. The characterization of the drone is also on point in the looks department. The methodical, almost sensual way that it stalks around searching for you absolutely embodies that creature that we were just introduced to back in 1979. Another thing that I also like with this Xenomorph is that the way it hunts is different to something like Aliens, since it's closer to the Nostromo Xeno. Like the Nostromo drone, our stalker almost takes joy from messing with us. Sometimes it will know you're in a locker and just pretend it doesn't until you think you're safe. Sometimes it will go backstage only because it knows you'll try and move when it does that. The alien takes some enjoyment from menacing us. It enjoys the hunt, which is terrifying. I mean, just say you're getting hunted by a predator, right? Fair game, you're just competing in a blood sport that you didn't really agree to be a part of. But a Xenomorph is essentially mindless, except for a little spot in its head that enjoys terrifying you. Like, it may know you're hiding under a table, but it wanted to watch you squirm a little bit before it killed you. And the craziest part is we haven't even really covered the best part of gameplay with this thing yet. Like, it's all well and good to be sneaking around this thing. The AI is amazing when it's searching for you, but what really makes it special is the way that it's rolled into the rest of Sevastopol's world, the way it interacts with other NPCs and your movements, and how it just makes the entire station feel claustrophobic and dangerous. It's incredible. But anyway, we're going to save all of that for a little bit later in the video just to keep the pacing going. So continuing on, we evade the Xenomorph for a bit and eventually find the keycard we need to get to the dispensary. And reuniting with Dr. Kuhlman, Ripley accuses him of sending her in there even though he knew the alien was in the area.
Damn you, Kuhlman! You knew that thing was here!
Now that's unfair. I thought it might be there. There's a difference.
But Kuhlman kind of waves it off and heads into another room to punch in the dispensary code. And preparing to follow him, a super eerie detail you can find here is that if you bring up the motion tracker, you can see one stationary dot that suddenly vanishes. But you know, since it's probably nothing, we enter the medical lobby where Kuhlman activates the dispensary elevator and goes to get his stuff. This is when it's unfortunately revealed that the motion dot we saw wasn't just a false reading. Also, just a little side tangent, something I find really funny about this whole level is kind of what you can find out about Dr. Kuhlman, because on the surface, he just kind of seems like a bit of a selfish asshole, but when you read all the text logs you can find in the level and listen to all the audio logs, it paints a much worse picture of the guy. Like, something you might have considered during this level is, why can't Kuhlman access the dispensary if he's a doctor in this facility? And what we can find out is that he was actually locked out before everything went down by the two other doctors on the station. And they did this because Kuhlman was secretly a massive crackhead and was writing fake prescriptions for himself. On the surface, it's like, okay, that's a bit of interesting lore, but if you really think about it in the game sense, this guy really wanted a fix, but didn't want to go down to the hospital because he knew the Xeno was lurking around. So he was just kind of waiting around for someone to come along so he could con them into getting access to the dispensary for him. Like, all this insane shit that's happening on Sevastopol, and this guy's one priority is getting plastered. Also, this puts our first interaction with him in a totally different lens, because Ripley says she needs medical supplies in the "my friend is going to die" way, and Kuhlman says, but in the way that means I need Fent. Anyway, that's enough talking about dead characters, because moving forwards, there really isn't too much to talk about. The alien continues to hunt us further into the hospital. We find a stun baton. No, it doesn't work on the alien, I tried. We also find a video recorded by a Dr. Lingard who said she was blackmailed into performing an operation on a patient. She also mentions that the patient had some sort of parasite growing inside of them, although we don't get too many more details. Finally, near the end of the level, we find the trauma kit we came here for, which also happens to be in the operating theater where Dr. Lingard's botched operation happened. And if you read a nearby terminal, we can learn that the victim's name was Catherine Foster, although the truly interesting detail is that she was a part of the Anisadora's crew, which, if you remember, was the ship that supposedly brought the flight recorder of the Nostromo to Sevastopol. So far, far, we still don't have all the pieces of the puzzle, but it's beginning to become clear that the Anisadora may have brought more to this station than just a black box. But having what we came for, we begin making our way out of the medical wing, although Samuel's radios in telling us that the area has been locked down, so triggering the evacuation procedure, we make a break for the exit, constantly having to avoid the xenomorph and survivors alike. In the end though, the alien catches up to us just as we make it to reception. Waking up, the medical center is in flames, and in order to escape, Ripley begins climbing the most 2010 sequence this game has to offer. Like, this game's good, but it's not above throwing in a quick time event climbing sequence. But anyway, Ripley ends up mashing E quick enough, and we enter the vents, which eventually takes us to level 7, named Seegson Synthetics. And once again, this is kind of a nothing level, which makes sense since in my opinion, this is one of the first levels where the training wheels have actually been taken off. And yeah, I know, level 7 sounds like it's a really late point for the training phase to be ending, but this is actually one of the best things about Alien Isolation. Because if there's one thing the game does really well, it's having the patience to not put all its best stuff in the first 5 minutes. Like, if this game had been made 5 years earlier, Ripley would have found the motion tracker, the gun, and also had a stealth sequence with the alien all within the first 20 minutes. But Isolation isn't your usual game. It takes a lot, and I mean a lot, of time to show you gameplay mechanics before you yourself have to use them. It's almost like a version of Dead Space that's slightly less mean to you, but like in a more flip-floppy way, where 1 minute the game will be saying, alright player, see this guy trying to shoot the xenomorph? See, it's not working, is it? Don't shoot the xenomorph, alright? And then the next minute, it'll drop you in a room where it seems like the best and only option is to shoot the xenomorph. The game's just weird like that. But yeah, this level is literally just an in-between level to show the player that this is how things will be now. You've got your tools, you've got a horrifying killing machine constantly hunting you. Get out of there, don't die, have fun! Anyway, that's all to say that I'm skipping this level, because much more interesting stuff is happening after we make it back to Samuels and Taylor, who have been found by what's left of Sevastopol's police force.
What the hell is going on here, Marshall? Where's the security forces?
You're looking at them.
Now this is Marshall Waits, and we'll learn more about him later, but for now he tells us exactly what we just learned back in medical, that the ship that brought the flight recorder to Sevastopol also seemingly brought the alien. We also learned that the reason the entrance to the medical center was locked down was because it was all part of Waits' plan to trap and kill the alien.
Go make yourself useful, seeing as you screwed up the trap.
The xenomorph was pretty much 3 meters from your massive stockpile of bombs, and you still couldn't kill it. Like, how is this my fault? But anyways, Taylor is still in critical condition, and with Waits saying that we can use the medical unit back at the Marshall Bureau, our objective is set to restore the station's transportation system. And this is probably one of the shortest missions in the game, because all we have to do is go to a single room and pull some levers. And once we do that, Waits radios in telling us that the transit car has arrived. But Ripley tells him to go without her since the elevator we took to get here malfunctioned, which is essentially just a way to introduce us to our third and final way of getting around Sevastopol, which is the gas torch. Using this, the player can open emergency release hatches on doors to get inside, and I gotta say, while I like all the different options the game gives the player when it comes to getting into places, I feel like the game is missing just one layer of system depth that would actually justify having all of these options. Because if you haven't figured it out yet, one of the reasons why I like this game so much is because it reminds me of one of my favorite games of all time, which is BioShock. In BioShock, it's a pretty similar premise. Shit has hit the fan, you're in a place full of people who will kill you on sight, and it's up to you to ensure your own survival. The way you do this is by exploring your surroundings, especially in the first game where many of the levels are completely open. You have an objective, you're told how to complete that objective, and yet you could spend over an hour just looking around. You might pick up an audio log that gives you the code to a room which holds money, or maybe a new plasmid. You can find hideouts that survivors have previously used. You can find upgrades for your guns. Overall, BioShock is an immersive sim. It's about immersing yourself in the world, and if you do it right, you're rewarded for it. Alien Isolation is a little bit different in the way that it's just one step shy of being an immersive sim. You can find all these methods of opening doors, but more often than not, there's pretty much nothing interesting waiting for you on the other side except maybe some bullets or crafting materials. It's really strange because the game has you revisiting locations over and over again, but it still remains extremely linear. Earlier earlier in the game, you might not have a certain tool to open a certain door, but later in the game, if you revisit the same area, the game will make damn sure that you pass directly by said door. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it feels like the game is telling you that there's more exploration and stuff to be done than there really is. But yeah, moving on, we eventually make it to the transit hub and finally leave the Psi Med Tower for the Habitation Tower. And this area is where most people on Sevastopol lived, although it's clear that it's seen better days. Graffiti is painted on nearly every wall, there's bags everywhere, packed by people who never got the chance to leave. And the only place with any obvious life in it is the Marshal's Bureau, where we once again meet up with Marshal Waits. And he tells us that Taylor is in the medical bay with Samuels, which kind of puts an end to a pretty long mission line. Like for about 4 missions straight, we've been trying to get Taylor medical supplies, and for about 5 missions before that, we've been wandering around aimlessly trying to survive. It really makes you realize how little the story has actually progressed in like 6 or 7 hours of gameplay, which for the moment isn't a bad thing. The story has been really well paced, but spoiler alert, that might change a little bit in the future. But until then, we still have some good stuff to get through, since Waits tells us that he has the captain of the Anesidora named Marlowe in custody. And apparently Marlowe won't give Waits the codes to bring his ship to Sevastopol for evacuation, and asks us if we can try our luck. So heading over to Marlowe's cell, Amanda says hi and tells him that she's the daughter of Ellen Ripley. Marlowe tries to make a deal to get out of custody, but Ripley just wants to know how they came across the alien.
Maybe we can make a deal.
Just start talking. I want to know everything.
Comm check. You get me, Lewis?
And at this point, we step out of Amanda's shoes and into Marlowe's from a couple weeks earlier. See, Marlowe is the captain of the Anesidora, which is a salvage ship. And during a normal search, they came across the Nostromo's flight recorder. Seeing as the disappearance of the Nostromo was a widely known event, Marlowe thought that the flight recorder might be his key to a massive salvage and had the recorder's data extracted. And with that, they went to the region of its last update and picked up a distress signal coming from a moon. A moon called LV-426. And this is where the gameplay picks back up again. As Marlowe, we exit the Anesidora onto the surface of LV-426 and begin following the signal using a tracker. Now, full disclosure, this part is pretty heavily scripted, and the only thing we actually have to do as the player is use the motion tracker to point us in the right direction. But man, does the devs' homework show here. It's that zero visibility, that constant storm, that strange ambience you can hear. It's fucking perfect. It's like creative assembly just united to make the perfect game and then just disappeared. Oh, I love them. But continuing forward, we eventually begin climbing a slope and find nothing other than the derelict. And the segment ends here in order to not force us to walk for like 20 minutes to get to the thing, but after the transition we head inside the ship and it's not too long before we find the central chamber. And look, I know this thing's meant to be an engineer, but that thing's a space jockey. It's so cool. Every time I see this thing, I'm just filled with this massive just sense of mystery. This ancient being has been here for so long. He's fossilized into the chair. It's obviously much taller than the average human, and it even looks like he was piloting this massive ship all by itself. And I'll talk about it a bit later, but one of the things I love about Alien is the idea that the space jockeys invoke. Through the series, a lot of stuff is about xenomorphs and corporations and body horror, but this one element just dwarfs all that. Every important thing that's happened in this game, in this series, it's all implied to just be puny in comparison in the grand expanse of the universe. Anyway, continuing forwards, Marlowe decides to hunt down the distress signal the derelict is sending out, and we eventually find a chamber holding the emitter, shutting it off. Also, fun fact about this moment, Creative Assembly put this objective in to fix a plot hole in Aliens. Small spoiler for that movie, by the way. But in Aliens, it takes place a couple of decades after the first, and LV-426 has been colonized. The plot hole is that in the original, the Nostromo picked up a distress signal coming from the planet. That's the entire reason the movie happened. But then years later, Weyland-Yutani came to colonize the planet, and no one picked up a distress signal during the entire time the colony was being planned, set up, or, lived in, but isolation fixes this plot hole by having Marlowe turn off the signal years before the colony was even an idea the company had. But back to the task at hand, after Marlowe turns off the signal, we return to the space jockey chamber to find that our team has discovered the equipment that the crew of the Nostromo set up. With Marlowe being worried that the crew might still be alive, voiding his salvage rights, we descend into the cargo hold and just dude, creative assembly, good job guys. This entire chamber is just as massive and awe-inspiring as it was in the original. I love this game! But in the chamber we discover hundreds of eggs, and while we know what these things are, Marlowe and his crew don't, with his wife Catherine getting a bit too close. And that's where the flashback ends, except the story doesn't, because this little bit of information we've gotten during this flashback actually informs a lot of Sevastopol's story. And what we're beginning to see is that the story so far looks a bit like this. After Catherine was face-hugged, the crew hurried her back to the Anisadora and put her in stasis. They then plotted to the closest place that had a hospital, with that being Sevastopol, and contacted a man named Sinclair, the ringleader of Sevastopol's black market, and also the head of the Seegson security force. Now, since the Seegson security force controlled everything that came in and out of the station, Sinclair was able to get Marlowe and Catherine past quarantine, but it didn't escape the attention of a man named Ransom. Now, I haven't mentioned Ransom until now because he actually never appears in the game, but his impact on the story can't be underestimated. See, Ransom is your average corporate shithead type. He's one of the top executives on board Sevastopol and mostly spends his time spying on the population with his access to the surveillance and data systems. He then uses what he learns as blackmail to get what he wants. All that matters to him is the next step up the corporate chain and the next addition to his bank account. It's really funny because half the audio logs you find of this guy around the station aren't even related to the story. It's just Ransom going, "Yeah buddy, I saw you steal that jackhammer from your co-worker's toolbox, and I'll tell the marshals unless I'm invited to your next birthday party." Also, no, the irony of a serial blackmailer's last name being Ransom is not lost on me. But yeah, Ransom received information from someone at the Marshal's Bureau about the chest burster found within Catherine. This immediately piqued his interest and he threatened Dr. Lingard with blackmail he dug up on her. Turns out Dr. Lingard was potentially selling medical supplies on Sevastopol's black market. Also, it's never stated whether she was selling or buying on the black market. Ransom is vague about it in the text log, but either way, Seegson, you really need to start hiring doctors that you can trust around prescription medicine, dude. Anyway, so Ransom got kept in the loop and was present for the operation when Lingard tried to remove the chest burster. Unfortunately, by now it was already too late and the burster emerged just before the surgery, escaping into the vents. And after this, it all went downhill. Marshal Waits was afraid that news of Catherine's death would incite panic among the population of Sevastopol, so he kept the death quiet even over the next few days as people began going missing. But then something even worse happened. Just days after the chest burster emerged from Catherine's body, the station suddenly stopped. All communications sent to and from Sevastopol were jammed. Working Joes abandoned their stations, wandering aimlessly, and all travel to and from the station was disabled. The people who lived there were truly trapped, or some might say, isolated. And as time went on, people became more afraid and paranoid, fleeing their home in search of less accessible hideaways. It was slowly becoming less about rumors and more about survival. And there wasn't anyone that had more of a survivor's mentality than Jake Sinclair. As previously mentioned, he was the leader of the station's Seegson security force and was also the man that ran the black market. But above all, he was one of the first to go down the route of violence. Pretty soon after people began disappearing, Sinclair ordered his men to abandon their posts and begin stockpiling supplies. This meant taking what they wanted from who they wanted, often by deadly force, bringing whatever they found back to what Sinclair called the Sanctuary, a place in the Habitation Tower that they planned to eventually seal themselves inside of to safely wait out help. And this is pretty much the state of Sevastopol when we start the game. There are two major factions. You have Sinclair's gang, who are only concerned with getting their hands on as many supplies as possible. You have the Marshals, who are trying to fight Sinclair's gang while hunting down the Xenomorph, but but won't tell the public anything. And then you have everyone else. Survivors running scared, forming small gangs, a society driven to collapse by fear. And yeah, that's kind of where the story is at the moment. And also, don't worry, that's not the entire story yet. Just a bit later, we're going to find out the final and major thing that ties all these little incidents all together. But for now, we're going to jump back into the present. And the present just happens to be back in the Marshal's Bureau. We try to get more out of Marlowe, but he won't say anything without making a deal to get out of custody. But we don't really have any more time to talk since we hear one of the Marshal's men reporting that they detected movement in the tech spire. And in response, Marshal Waits enacts Plan B. Ripley volunteers to help with the plan, and Waits is all too happy to accept, giving us a jerry-rigged flamethrower and sending us on our way. And this next level really brings us full circle, since we head back to the area we started the game in, except this time we are much more prepared. As for what Waits' plan actually is, the general idea is for the alien to hunt Ripley while she makes her way around the spire, shutting off vents and doorways and anything the alien could use to get out. The thought process is that if we can't kill it, then the next best thing we can do is trap it. And what the whole level really boils down to is one big skill check, because here you have to put everything you've learned through the game to use, except you don't. And this is the part where we're going to talk about gameplay properly and fully. And for anyone that's wondering why it took me so long to talk about the gameplay in its totality, it's because in this level, you're given a weapon that completely destroys this perfectly balanced ecosystem we've been playing in. And I don't think there's any better way to talk about this ecosystem than to talk about the one weapon that can bring the entire thing crashing down. Now, the important thing to know when talking about Alien Isolation's gameplay is that this isn't a game about shooting or getting into fights. It's a game about using the right tools for the right situations. When dealing with humans, the right tools are things like smoke bombs, flashbangs, the maintenance jack, or the pistol. With Working Joes, many of these won't work. The Working Joe will overpower you if you try to melee attack it, and if you try to shoot it. But the right tools for a Working Joe is the stun baton, the EMP grenade, the shotgun, or the bolt gun. But here's the thing, when I say that the game is about using tools to solve certain problems, sometimes the best tools at your disposal are the things that'll keep you from being caught in the first place. Because this game is entirely built on a food chain, since the xenomorph never stops hunting you. Ripley, the player, is at the bottom. Then you have groups of humans, then you have Working Joes, and then you have the xenomorph above all of them. And what makes the earlier levels great is that you usually have the tools to take down any human or any Joe you come across. But just because you can win a fight doesn't mean you should get into a fight. Take for instance this moment when I was making my way through the medical center. I came across a group of 3 humans and thought, yeah, I can take these guys. So I threw a smoke bomb, tased a guy, shot another person with my last bullet, and looped around the room's pillar, knocking the last guy out. And here I was, the victor, a player who had used the resources he had at his disposal to clear an obstacle, and now I had access to an entire group's supply of ammo, except
a few moments later.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Alien Isolation's food chain. You might be able to win a fight against a group of humans or Working Joes, but fights make noise, and noise attracts the one thing on the station you cannot hurt. With the shotgun, you can temporarily stun the xenomorph, but when it's in the area, you are on the bleeding edge of losing all of your progress. And that's why this game is so special. Every situation has a wildly different and unique solution. Like after this moment, I put together this whole food chain thing in my head, and I realized that if the xenomorph is hanging around, then why on Sevastopol am I using my resources to kill enemies that the Xeno will happily chow down on if he showed up anyway? Later in the same level, I started just throwing noisemakers into groups of humans, summoning the xenomorph like some kind of weird dog. That felt amazing. Just using what I knew about how the xenomorph showed up and how it hunted to clear out obstacles that would drain away my resources and probably lead to me dying anyway, it just felt incredible. It is just this perfect system that around level 10 they were like, this is getting boring, let's fuck it up. And they did that by introducing the Flamethrower. And look, before we get into this, I know the Flamethrower is a staple of the Alien franchise. There's no way they could leave this out, not even in a game that wasn't as faithful as as this one. But man, the way they made this thing work just destroys the entire AI ecosystem we just discussed. Pretty much the Flamethrower. This is useful against humans, useless against working Joes, but downright broken against the Xenomorph. If it shows up and you unholster it, the Xeno will slow down. It's obviously afraid of fire, but it will keep approaching you. But if you blast it a couple times with fire, it will pretty much reset the Xeno's AI, making it jump back into the vents until another good opportunity to kill you comes up. And I guess it does follow the design philosophy of the other weapons in the game. You have tools to deal with humans and working Joes. I suppose it's only fair that they have a tool to deal with the Xenomorph, right? But I kind of liked that the Xeno was that one big bad that you couldn't fight, and if it showed up, you needed to stop whatever you were doing and just hide. The Flamethrower not only throws this status quo out the window, but it also seriously changes how the entire system works for the worse. Because now you have tools to beat every type of enemy. If I see some humans, I can shoot them all, loot them, and then if the alien shows up, I can scare it off for a minute or so. If a working Joe is coming after me, I can sprint away, because if the Xenomorph hears me and shows up, I can also scare it away. And combining this with the fact that Flamethrower fuel is super common on the recommended difficulty, it kind of dismantles the entire food chain idea and just reclassifies humans as pushovers, working Joes as slowpokes, and the big bad Xenomorph as a nuisance. And just to be clear here, the shakeup of where different enemies now land on the power scale doesn't ruin the game, it just changes how the whole thing feels. And by extension, you begin to see how other problems emerge as we continue on further. But picking up back with Ripley, after locking down all the sections of the tech spire, we lure the Xenomorph into a server room, but the plan goes wrong when Ricardo, one of Marshall Waite's men, can't get the system to open an exit for Ripley. As an alternative, he instead just unlocks the entire spire, undoing all the work we've done. Waits is furious, but understands that it was the only way to save Ripley, and the trio enact Plan C. And honestly, Plan C to me seems like it's a little bit better than Plan B, because this time we're told to head to Gemini Labs and lure the Xenomorph into one of the laboratories that can be jettisoned from the station. So heading there, we do some more hiding from the working Joes and the Xeno nuisance before eventually finding the correct lab. We then work at getting it online and give the controls to Waits. The Xenomorph then shows up, and as we go to exit the lab, Waits shows his true colors.
I'm sorry, Ripley.
No! No! Don't fucking do this to me!
This is the Big Showdown. Ever since the medical center, the Xenomorph drone has been hunting us relentlessly, and now the cards are stacked against us more than ever. We're in a small lab hurtling through space with one of the most dangerous creatures in existence. And unsurprisingly, our one job is to escape, so we begin cycling the airlock, and although it takes about a minute, it feels way longer, because this entire sequence is intense. There's no stable light sources, and the ones that are shine dimly, making the Xenomorph hard to spot. And while speaking of the Xeno, just remember, the AI of the alien unlocks new ways to hunt us the longer it's been doing it, and this guy has been on us for hours. It knows our tricks, it knows the way we hide, and there's no distractions. It's simply us and it. But eventually the airlock finally opens, and running into it, we'd usually see a cool little scene of the Xenomorph nearly grabbing us in the door, although I kind of ruined it by throwing a smoke bomb, sorry guys. But once inside, the airlock begins to depressurize, and Ripley only just manages to get a spacesuit on before she's sucked out into the void. Although luckily she was thrown in the right direction, slamming back into Sevastopol and dragging herself into an airlock. Re-entering Sevastopol is a strange feeling. The airlock is calm and silent. Moving out into the hallways, it's quiet. There's no banging in the vents or distant shrieks. Pulling up the motion detector, there's nothing. No pings, no movement, no anything. For the first time in the game, we can sprint around without a worry in Sevastopol. But actually, Ripley does have a few worries and calls up Waits to have a bit of a chat.
Ripley, is that you?
Yes, Waits. Me, you son of a bitch! You locked me in! You blew the lab into space!
I had no choice. No choice at all. You saw that thing. You saw what it could do. I had to get it off the station. By any means necessary.
Yeah. Use me as bait. Leave me to die.
And it goddamn worked, Ripley. It goddamn worked. I got that thing. Jettisoned it into the gas giant.
I'm heading back to the Bureau. We can discuss your methods there.
But with our objective set of getting back to the Marshal's Bureau, Waits radios in saying the working Joes are acting strange. They've started spreading out all over the station, killing anyone they can find. As well as that, people are starting to notice that the alien is gone and are coming out of hiding, but the struggle for power continues. So with all these obstacles standing between us and the Bureau, we prepare for the biggest fight of the game. But this time it's different, because there's no xenomorph that's going to interrupt this one. It's just us and them. Our combat potential has been fully unlocked. Eventually we make it to a door that only Waits can open, and trying to contact him, all we hear back are sounds of him getting attacked by a working Joe.
Bastards!
Taking another route, we discover a back way into the Marshal's Bureau and discover a bloodbath. Waits and pretty much everyone else that was hiding here is dead. Taylor and Marlowe have disappeared and only Ricardo seems to have survived. And although Ricardo wants to leave with Ripley, she convinces him to stay in the Bureau to keep feeding her information. And this is where the game starts to lose me a little bit. And also, don't worry, a great game can have bad bits. I'm not saying that Alien Isolation is shit because of what I'm about to talk about. What I am just saying is that around this point, the game officially becomes too long. Like, we are nearly 9 hours into the game, and only just now are we actually starting the third act, when I feel like we should be wrapping this up. Because if you think about it, the previous level was the perfect climax. You get a pretty overpowered weapon, you have one final showdown with the Xenomorph, and you emerge victorious. I wouldn't mind if the game finished up maybe even 2 levels after this point, but we still have 8 levels to go. That's a lot of game left considering we just passed a point that could easily have been the end. Anyway, so that really just means we'll be skimming a lot of the upcoming levels pretty hard because each one seemingly only has like 1 or 2 story beats, and man, this video is already running pretty long, like damn. But yeah, continuing on, Ripley sets off to find Samuels. Since if you didn't know, Samuels is actually a Weyland-Yutani synthetic, and no, that's not a spoiler. It's not even a reveal because they don't ever talk about it. They just kind of drop a few hints, and then in this mission, every character just automatically knows that Samuels is a synthetic. I mean, everyone but me, apparently.
Ah, Ripley.
Samuels, did you wake up early?
Well, I don't really need as much sleep as the rest of you.
Said he wanted to help and I have my hands full here. Besides, he's a synthetic. Should be easier for him to get in there.
It kind of makes you wonder how much stuff is left in the story that you haven't been told but are kind of expected to know. Spoiler alert, there's a little bit of stuff. But anyways, after a bit of wandering around, we see Samuels while crawling through a vent and get to witness some of the coolest shit ever.
I don't have time for this.
Alright everyone, Samuels is now officially my favorite character in this game. Comment hell yes Samuels if you love him as much as I do. But meeting up with him, Samuels tells us that he can't connect to Apollo, but is planning to use the reformat chamber on himself to at least try and get an audience with it, which will likely destroy his program. And our job through this process is to make sure the reformat chamber continues to get power. However, if it all goes wrong and Apollo rejects Samuels, leading to us having to shut down the machine in a certain order. In the end, we don't get it done quick enough though, and the damage has been done.
Samuels, you're dying.
You talk like I've had an actual life. I thank you for that.
And this scene is pretty sad, but I feel like it would have been better if they had established more clearly that Samuels was a synthetic, someone that was underappreciated or looked down on by humans around him. That was a piece of Bishop's character in Aliens, and it seems like it could have been a cool concept to explore in this game, you know, since it's 12 hours long. But as Samuels dies, he tells us that he opened the transit system to the Apollo core so that Ripley can go and speak directly with Apollo. And that's exactly what we do. Arriving at the Apollo core, we run around for a bit preparing all the systems needed to talk to the AI, and the big gimmick of the area is the new type of working Joes. And these guys are just awesome to fight, dude. They're tougher than normal Joes. They can't be tased or hit with EMPs. It's like the devs just thought, damn, we got rid of the one enemy the player needs to sneak around. How can we make a new one? Anyway, making it to the Apollo core, we boot it up and step inside to learn the final piece of this whole puzzle. Sitting down, Ripley tells the AI to disengage the working Joes, but Apollo refuses, stating it's working under something called Special Order 939. And if any of you remember all the way back at the start of the video, in the original Alien, both the Nostromo's AI and the secret synthetic Ash were following Special Order 937, a Weyland-Yutani order that kicked in if the possibility of capturing a xenomorph specimen presented itself. And here it's not too different. As it turns out, Weyland-Yutani has owned Sevastopol station for nearly a month, and this is all thanks to our favorite corporate shithead, Ransom, because after witnessing the chestburster emerge from Catherine, he sent samples to Gemini Labs for analysis, and presumably sent the findings to Weyland-Yutani. Ransom believed that he would be rewarded for delivering a living xenomorph specimen to the company, especially after the station was purchased by them. But this move was just their way of controlling the situation. Once bought, they sent over new operating parameters for Apollo, and Special Order 939 took effect. The station's AI, and by extension all working Joes controlled by it, were now only concerned with protecting the xenomorph, keeping the station completely locked down and cutting all communications. This is also why the working Joes turned fully hostile after the xenomorph got jettisoned. It now considered all humans to be a threat to the success of Special Order 939. But coming off the Lord train, Amanda tells Apollo to suspend the special order, since the xenomorph isn't on the station anymore. However, Apollo says, maybe, and cites that it hasn't been able to fully scan its main reactor core yet to confirm the lack of xenomorphs aboard. So Ripley decides to check it out herself, and we make our way to the reactor core, entering an elevator. And after the loading screen, I'm sure many of you saw this coming, but this has still got to be one of my favorite oh shit moments in any game ever.
Oh no. God, no.
As it happens, the reactor can't be scanned because it's not just a reactor anymore. It's a xenomorph hive, one that's been under construction since the day the chestburster emerged from Catherine and escaped. All those disappearances were more kidnappings, people who were snatched up by drones and brought here to create more xenomorphs. After all the mystery and unanswered questions, you hit square in the face with the answers, and all of a sudden you've become the alien roaming through another species environment. The scariest thing here is that if you pull up the motion tracker, it just lights up with dots. This place is alive and crawling with the things. And I only say things because while there's definitely some xenomorphs hanging around, one of the new enemies we're introduced to is the facehugger. And they're pretty simple creatures. Some could even call them straightforward, mostly because it does nothing but run in a straight line at you and
attempt to couple with your head.
Also, some of you might be little xenomorph nerds like me and be wondering, wait, if there's eggs, then that means there needs to be a queen, and how is there a queen if Catherine was hit with a normal facehugger? Well, I was wondering that too, and I looked it up. Apparently normal xenomorph drones can actually just evolve into alien queens if the situation demands it. So that means that the xenomorph that was blown out into space isn't even the original chestburster. The devs also commented on this and said that there was a queen on Sevastopol station and is in the area that we're in right now, but they didn't want to show it because it would change the tone of the game, and the player would probably expect a boss fight, which, yeah, if Ripley can't handle a single drone, she would not be able to kill a queen. But back on the story, Ripley decides that she needs to overload the power core to destroy the hive, and as we make our way through the hive, oh my gosh, this segment is really fucking good. All around you, there's just this horrifying ambience, distant screams that could belong to humans or Xenos alike, low groans and drafts of air flow through the hall. And once again, a Xenomorph shows up to patrol, something that really changes how the gameplay feels. I mean, after nearly 3 levels of not having to worry about these things, all of a sudden we're faced with some problem that we can't just solve with guns. But eventually we get what we need to do done in the hive and head back up to the reactor core to continue the overloading process. And once that's done, we head to the main control room and purge all excess energy down into the hive. Which apparently does destroy it, but not before multiple Xenomorphs escape out into the station. Ripley then begins losing hope as her plan didn't work, but Ricardo radios in telling us to get to medical, and on the way he explains that the purge reset many of Sevastopol's systems, including the communications. Marlowe must have used the window to call in the Anesidora because Ricardo says it's much closer to Sevastopol now, close enough for Ripley to take an ambulance shuttle from medical and dock with the ship. So making it to an ambulance shuttle, we head over to the Anesidora. Once aboard, we explore the vessel, finding text logs and audio tapes that paint the story of how they came across LV-426. Also, these text logs were where I learned that Catherine was actually Marlowe's wife. Like, I mentioned that Catherine was Marlowe's wife earlier in the video, but that's only because I learned that information here. But before that point, I had no idea. I mean, maybe I just missed something where they explain that, or maybe I'm just stupid and can't read the room, but I swear I did not know this. Marlowe never even mentions her when we talk to him in his cell, and he doesn't even seem that broken up about it. I mean, your wife died, dude. Also, by the way, him not being too sad about his wife's death is also kind of what makes this next scene kind of like really funny, but in a kind of like fucked up way, you'll see. But moving forwards, we get the power on and eventually end up in the reactor room, where we find a computer holding the Nostromo's flight recorder data. Yeah, I bet you forgot all about that subplot, didn't you? Well, that's okay, because so did I.
Hi, Amanda. I'm recording this for you, my sweetheart, and I hope you get to hear it one day. You see, I got into trouble. My ship, there was an accident, sweetheart, and we found an alien creature. It was very dangerous, and the only way we could stop it was to destroy the ship. I'm okay. I'm stuck on this lifeboat, long way out, but we had to destroy the ship. We had to destroy the Nostromo. We just couldn't risk bringing that thing home with us. I needed to protect you. Don't worry. Don't worry about me. I'm sure I'll see you very soon. I love you, sweetheart.
And that was Amanda Ripley's closure, which kinda sucks because now she knows her mother escaped but then never turned up anywhere. I mean, just poor Amanda. First, all she knows is that her mother is either missing or dead, but now we just know that she's not dead and she has less reason to be missing, so it just kinda makes the whole situation kinda worse. Amanda doesn't have much time to process this new information though, as it's revealed that Marlowe has kidnapped Taylor for some reason and tells us that he's gonna overload his ship's fusion reactor in order to destroy Sevastopol and all the Xenomorphs on it. And we learned that he's only doing this mostly because he's heartbroken about his wife being dead. Taylor knocks him out though, and in a race against time, the two work together to stop the reactor meltdown. And look, I know this is meant to be an intense scene, but I just could not focus because this sounds exactly like my first gaming computer ever. Like, when I first built this thing, I didn't put all the parts together properly, and it just vibrated so loudly. I used to have to like assault my computer to get it to quiet down, and I don't know where they got this noise, but it's exactly the same noise.
Yo, what's up guys? Just finished school and now we're gonna play some Counter-Strike 1.6. Let's load up Dust 2. Alright, now I never really told you guys why I love Dust 2.
I also couldn't focus because near the end of the sequence, the reactor's about to go critical. It's literally just a ball of light, and Taylor is just standing there staring into it just like... Anyway, sorry, I'm ruining the mood. Eventually, after suffering permanent blindness and hearing loss, Taylor and Ripley shut down the core, but it's still too late and the overload is unstoppable. Taylor then dies in the most unintentionally funny way ever. And we sprint back to the ambulance shuttle as the Anesidora is torn apart around us. Now I'm going to be honest, on the way back to Sevastopol, the whole sequence just has that vibe of that Donkey Kong meme where they're all in the car and looking really sad. Because honestly, the game has really overstayed its welcome at this point. There are literally about 3 times so far that the game could have ended and it just didn't. Once when we killed a Xenomorph, another time when we destroy the nest, or like, what about when we actually left Sevastopol station, got on another ship, and got the power on, and then killed the captain? I'm starting to feel like I'm fighting the game rather than the Xenomorph. I understand that this game is about things just constantly going wrong, but this is getting a bit ridiculous. Another problem I've got with our little trip to the Anesidora is that it's played out like it's some big moment, but pretty much every single element of this level feels like it should have been built up, but just wasn't. To start with Marlowe, the guy seemed pretty calm and collected when we met him. Personally, I wouldn't be as chill if my wife died and I was held in custody for a month, but you know, that's just me. But then he shows up on the Anesidora after not being a part of the story for a couple levels and is all like, I'm gonna blow myself up with the rest of the station because I'm really sad about my wife. I just don't really buy it. He's so chilled out when we meet him in the game. I just assumed that Catherine was just another part of his crew, but no, that's his wife and he's really sad about it, trust me. I also just feel like there are some things that aren't really explained that well in this game. Like, we don't see Taylor being up and about for nearly 90% of the game, but then she apparently just let Marlowe out of his cell and got taken hostage. By the way, that's info that I had to read off the wiki because it was either a piece of dialogue that was so small and quick that I missed it, or it was just flat out never explained. I don't know, man. It just gets kind of annoying when a lot of stuff you can read and listen to on the station is simply there to fill out the world, but then a very small amount is actually vital to understanding the current events of the story. You just get to some parts of the game, get confused, and then realize you missed a text log from like 3 levels ago. It'd be kind of like if in BioShock you didn't actually meet Andrew Ryan for the first time and you had to listen to an audio log to find out that he knows you're in Rapture. Like, that would kind of suck because it's a major plot point, you know? Just for an example, let's talk about the pretty empty payoff to the whole flight recorder plotline. To start, Ripley initially only comes to Sevastopol to get her hands on the recorder, but then when we find the thing, it's blank, and then the story just forgets about it for a while. The plotline then picks back up 11 levels later when you access some random computer, and Ripley, despite a couple of voice lines, doesn't really seem to give a shit either. Like, she's angry when the recorder has no data on it, but afterwards she doesn't really seem to care. And then when talking to Marlowe, she doesn't even mention that the flight recorder that he found doesn't have any data on it. I think that would be something I would want to chase up, personally. The major issue is the question of what exactly is Amanda's motivation. There's seemingly nothing propelling her through the story other than survival, which doesn't make much sense considering that she's actually here for reasons that are deeply personal to her. To me, this whole trip to the Anesidora is just plotline wrap-up central. It's like they just looked at the time and were like, oh shit, we need to get some plot lines wrapped up. Anyways, you can tell I'm probably not as big a fan of this part of the game, so we're going to speed up a little more and only mention the interesting parts from here on out. So arriving back on the station, Ricardo tells us that the explosion has knocked out Sevastopol's stabilizers, and the entire station is beginning to fall into the gas giant. The Torrens, which is still hanging around, is trying to contact the station, but the comms are still locked down. To make matters worse, Sinclair's gang has also come out of hiding in droves to try and contact the ship, and there are also about 14 xenomorphs hanging around. So we begin to do what we do best and start to sneak, hide, and kill our way to the comms center, and decide that in order to contact the Torrens, we'll need to realign the communication dishes manually. So donning the spacesuit, we step out, and like, this whole scene looks amazing. It's just got the same problem the overall game has, and that problem is that it's way too long. Like, in the spacesuit, they slow down your walking so much, and then they make you walk like 100 meters either way to your objective. I feel like Ripley's been replaced with Ethan Thomas or something. She's so slow. But we end up realigning the dish and are able to contact the Torrens. And Verlaine tells us that we'll have to head below the spaceflight terminal in order for the Torrens to dock. So with our new objective, we head back inside and find that Ricardo has been face-hugged. RIP, dude. You were, if nothing else, a character. But with us not really having any time to stop, we continue onwards towards the spaceflight terminal and end up having to head through the habitation area, which also happens to be Sinclair's sanctuary. And arriving here, we find that whatever safety this place once held is now long gone. The one place that we've heard throughout all the audio logs is safe has been brought down. Everyone here is dead. And look, let me just put a little disclaimer here. When I talk about things I don't like in a game, I can come across very passionate about my dislikes, but I don't want you guys thinking that I just hate the second half of this game, because I don't. The sanctuary is probably one of my favorite areas in the entire thing, just because of the story implication. Like, the rooms are just littered with bodies, but we do find the corpse of someone pretty notable here, the one and only Jake Sinclair. And next to him is an audio tape that I want to play, because for me, it makes a lot of the monotony in this game worth it. It just hits me with this massive dose of the world we've been exploring.
Last will and testament of some fuck you don't give a shit about. We couldn't keep them out. My wife is dead. My children have been taken. I tried, but I couldn't stop them. They broke through our defenses. There's so much blood on my hands. This is for the rescue party, for Seegson, or I don't know, whoever has to clean up this mess. We held out in here as long as we could. You didn't come fast enough. You fucked it. Just send in the Marines or blow this place up. Take these creatures back to hell.
Jake Sinclair was the man that let Marlowe and Catherine on board Sevastopol. He was also the first to turn violent in order to survive, and controlled a massive murderous gang that roamed the station. And to bring back my Bioshock comparison, this is really what sets Alien Isolation aside from that game. Because in Rapture, there were established factions. Andrew Ryan controls a lot of Rapture's inhabitants when you enter the city, and that's just the big status quo. All these characters and faction leaders you meet through the game are all important people in the story of Rapture, and each of them does eventually get their time to shine or even their time to die. But either way, they all seem to have a handle on things until the story pushed them either way. But then here in Isolation, you have Jake Sinclair, the leader of one of the two major powers in a post-chest burst to Sevastopol. After all the cold-blooded choices he's made and the people he's betrayed, it wasn't enough. Even a man with his power and the will to do anything to survive didn't make it. And I think that if you consider that this is the last audio log that you can find in the game, then it really puts a nice bow on the story of Sevastopol. In Bioshock, the story of Rapture is a struggle for power, but in Alien Isolation, it's just groups of people fighting over scraps, and in the end, there aren't any winners. But continuing to the spaceflight terminal, we contact Verlaine, who tells us that we need to initiate the docking procedure. But heading down, we find that the equipment has been removed by probably working Joes. So instead, we decide to suit up once again and spacewalk to the Torrens. Also, I'm making this all sound really easy, but I'm pretty sure the game heard me when I was complaining about the Flamethrower, because this section is really hard. Even if you don't make any noise, the alien just does not stay backstage. You know in Injustice how Batman does that little smoke move after he wins a round? That's the Xenomorph with the vents.
The gloves are off. You're mine. Can't outmaneuver me.
Also, just to make it a little bit harder, this isn't any regular Xenomorph. This is a Team Rocket Xenomorph because he brings a friend. There's 2 Xenomorphs. Holy shit. Anyway, my point is that this part is really difficult, but I eventually made it to the spacesuit room, and I was pretty sure that this was the end of the game, so I decided to see just how much I could ruin this thing's day and proceeded to create a trap made of 3 smoke bombs, 3 flashbangs, 1 EMP mine, 1 Molotov, and my sincerest fuck you. And this was the beautiful result. Anyways, after we've had our fun, Ripley goes to change into the spacesuit when the unthinkable happens. The game keeps going. Who could have seen this coming? Yeah, so I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This part is super unnecessary because like I already felt like we were running out of time to get off Sevastopol, but now Ripley is taken to a new nest by a Xenomorph, and it just kind of feels like it's a bit too late to be doing this. But either way, Ripley wakes up and breaks free from the hive structure, and we make our way through the transit system. We fall down a ladder and get a concussion, and we end up back where we left off. And yeah, I'm not joking when I say I actually thought we were going to get jump scared here again, but this time Ripley is able to actually put on the suit. And stepping outside, Verlaine tells us to hurry. The Torrens is clamped to Sevastopol, which is about to fall into the gas giant, and they have no way to release themselves. So it's up to us to blow the clamps off with the emergency release, and while any other game would be playing heart-pounding music during this moment, instead all it seems to play is a calm, reflective ambience, and I for one think it's fitting. Looking back at Sevastopol, it's covered in flames, and yet its lights still shine brightly, looking like a small city floating through the cosmos. For me personally, the lights make me think about the people. This place was home to thousands. There's still probably hundreds left in there with no hope of escape. Lives that will be snuffed out due to nothing but greed. Marlowe's greed, Ransom's greed, Weyland-Yutani's greed. In the end, it all leads back to power, which is why Alien remains one of my favorite franchises out there. Because while it is a horror series about aliens just killing people, it also has its deeper meanings. One of my favorite pieces of reoccurring imagery in the franchise is when massive man-made structures are shown against the massive backdrops of planets or space. Even the main menu of this game does it, but I've always seen it as almost a bit of a joke on the humans, because while Sevastopol is a huge station, while the Nostromo was a huge ship, they are all tiny in comparison to the gargantuan scale of the universe, and that all extends to our human ideas. Everything that's happened on Sevastopol was because of the desire for money or power, concepts that are meaningless on a cosmic scale, concepts that are ignorant of the uncomfortable truths that incidents like Sevastopol bring to light. Like Weyland-Yutani wants this creature because it would be very profitable for them, but not a single one of them has stopped to consider that the Xenomorphs look designed. I mean, it's covered in tubes, it looks half mechanical, half organic. Every piece of it was designed to hunt and kill. It's got acid for blood. What more evidence do you need? This thing seems like it's a bioweapon, and that implies that it's been created by someone else. And if this someone else ever found humans and just didn't like them, would all that money and power really mean all that much? That's kind of how I see it, and that's what this final look at Sevastopol tells me. And just, Creative Assembly, good job. Just fantastic job. This game's great. But to finish up with the story, Ripley goes about releasing the clamps. She then begins assembling the emergency docking clamp release, which also happens to be the same system that Ripley used to destroy the Nostromo. And yes, the entire animation pretty much takes the exact amount of time that it does in the original movie. It's just a minute and a half of Ripley finally finishes the procedure though, just as multiple xenomorphs climb aboard the Torrens, and with just seconds to spare, she releases the ship from the station. And in a final cutscene, we see Sevastopol break up on entry into the gas giant. Becoming a victim of the very planet it was built to mine and exploit.
Verlaine, I'm on my way up to the bridge.
Back on the Torrens, Ripley has made it aboard. The music is calm and hopeful, and the ship is probably the cleanest thing we've seen in the last 12 hours. And heading to the bridge, we're greeted by a new member of the crew. And that was Alien Isolation's main campaign, an absolute masterpiece of design, direction, and gameplay. Maybe not pacing, but you know, so many elements. And look, yeah, this game has its problems. It's long as hell and there's barely any level variety, but I want to make sure it's super clear that I am framing this as it being too much of a good thing. Just say you get 6 chicken nuggets, right? It's perfect. You savor each one and every single one is just as good as the last. But let's just say you get 20 chicken nuggets. They're all still great, but there's just too many and too much to keep appreciating the same thing for how good it is. That's Isolation's problem. It's a damn good game, but there's just damn too much of the there's just damn too much of the game. But before we wrap this up and go full retrospective mode, we're still not completely done, because Alien Isolation got some DLC, with them being Crew Expendable, Lone Survivor, and the Survival Packs. And I'll quickly just go over what each one was about. With Crew Expendable, we get to play as one of the Nostromo crew during the 1979 movie, as we attempt to trap the Xeno in an airlock and jettison it out into space. Overall, it's a cute little DLC. Versing the alien in the cramped halls of the Nostromo is a much tougher job than in Sevastopol, and there's this awesome segment that mirrors the part from the original movie where you have to go into the ventilation system while Lambert tries to direct you, and I put emphasis on tries.
Go left! Right! Go right!
Please pull it together, you're freaking me out. The DLC obviously ends with the plan failing and is just shrugged off as being another thing they tried during the events of the movie. Lone Survivor is the next DLC and my favorite out of the bunch, and it takes place at the very end of the original movie when the final 3 Nostromo survivors plan to escape in the ship's lifeboat. We take control of Ripley just as Lambert and Parker are attacked, and the whole DLC is pretty much just the final few minutes of the first movie. And when I say final minutes, I really do mean final minutes, including the time it takes for Ripley to set up the self-destruct sequence. Like, I appreciate the authenticity, but still, this animation is so long. But man, after we set the ship to blow, shit gets real. Like, sirens are blaring, there's steam everywhere. Ripley starts singing to herself. It's full on. It's awesome.
The Earth is a subsystem
Also, a little detail I like is that in the final cutscene, it plays Ripley's famous sign-off speech, but we also get visuals of what seems to be the lifeboat drifting way past the outer rim, setting up the fact that Ellen never made it home, leaving a young Amanda heartbroken and confused. Even during the events of Alien Isolation, in canon, Ellen Ripley is still out there, drifting through the stars, waiting for someone to find her. Finally, after the story DLC, we have the survivor modes, and back when I first played this, I saw the name Survivor Challenges and was like, nah, I'll pass. Because one of my favorite things about games is how the story makes the challenge more enticing to beat. But challenge modes to me are just all of the challenge and none of the story enticement. But alas, I was a fool, because the survivor mode actually does have a story in a pretty unique way. Pretty much for each mini campaign, you play as a notable character in Sevastopol's story, like Dr. Lingard as she heads into the medical center to find more supplies. You have Hughes, who was that dude who got killed by a working Joe in level 3, and you play as him as he attempts to fix different systems aboard Sevastopol. Personally though, my favorite is the one where you play as Ransom, who's realized that Weyland-Yutani has betrayed him, trapping him on the station just like everyone else. I also really like this Survivor campaign because it has Ransom doing his usual shithead stuff. Like, his main goal is to escape the station, but there's also bonus objectives where you delete incriminating data, download xenomorph research as a bargaining chip, that kind of stuff. It's such a cool way of incorporating the important characters of the story, because you often listen to these audio recordings and wonder what the Sevastopol incident was like for them. And yeah, it was pretty similar to Ripley's experience. Big Dog executive Ransom was out here hiding in a cupboard just like everybody else. But now let's talk about the legacy of Alien Isolation, because this is just a massive, clear-cut example of one of those games where you look at it and you scratch your head going, why did this never get a sequel? Well, the game didn't exactly pull the sales it needed. We don't have exact dollar metrics, but apparently this thing cost a lot of money to make and just didn't remake that investment well enough to warrant a sequel. And this also isn't a situation where years later we can drum up excitement and get the devs to make a new one, because many members of the team that made Isolation simply don't work at Creative Assembly anymore. The dream team is scattered, and Isolation will forever just be this incredible work of art that was only pulled together because of the perfect combination of each team member's talents. But don't worry guys, if you starve for Alien Isolation content, there is quite a lot of it out there, but there's a reason you've never heard of any of it. First up, there is technically a sequel to Isolation called Alien Blackout, which was a phone game that took place right after Alien Isolation. And in it, Ripley is picked up by a ship and taken to another station called Mendel Research Station. Somehow Special Order 939 gets put into effect again, and Ripley has to survive again. The funny part about this is that the sequel to one of the best horror games ever made is a straight up FNAF clone. Like, in it, you'd guide NPCs through the station using the camera systems, and the idea was that you had to keep them safe from the xenomorph while also making sure it didn't get into your office, crawl space. Personally, I played this back when it was still available to play, and overall I can say with confidence that it's an unworthy sequel and kind of an insulting continuation to one of the best horror games ever made. But hey, if you don't want to play the shitty sequel to Alien Isolation on your phone, that's okay, because we could actually still play the original Alien Isolation on your phone. Yeah, that's right, a couple of years ago, they actually made an Alien Isolation port for the iPhone. And it's honestly kind of impressive that they made this thing work, although I swear my iPhone 12 nearly exploded getting this footage.
Ah, Ripley.
Let's see, what else is there? There's a novelization of this game. There's the audiobook of the novelization. There was an Alien Isolation pinball game. Oh, and you guys are gonna love this. The game was adapted into a TV streaming series and uploaded by IGN. And yes, same IGN that gave Alien Isolation a 5.9, by the way.
I can't stand IGN.
But man, I just don't know how this project got greenlit, because the entire thing is just made up of cutscenes, snippets of gameplay, and then original animation sequences that sometimes look okay and other times...
I need to know what's going on right fucking now.
Like, it's a cool idea, don't get me wrong, but respectfully, what the fuck is this? Why did someone just look at this 5-year-old game and go, now that needs to be adapted into a hybrid TV series? Fuck yeah. Look, what I'm trying to get at is that Alien Isolation is a once-in-a-decade game. When a team of people assemble to create something amazing, create that thing, and just bounce. That's what's happened here. Because it's clear that the rights holders to Alien love Alien Isolation. They love how popular it is, but they can't actually get another game for it because the team that made it technically doesn't exist anymore. But finally, in retrospective, I think it's gotta be pretty obvious what I think about this game. It is a masterpiece for so many reasons. It experimented with gameplay mechanics that we hadn't seen before and haven't seen since. It truly captured the essence of Alien's world. And while it might be a bit too long and some story beats don't make too much sense, I think that the complete package more than makes up for its shortcomings. And will we see a sequel? Well, maybe. If there's one thing companies chase, it's success, and I don't see them leaving Isolations alone forever, which makes the real question not will they make a game, but if they do and when they do, will it be able to measure up? Well, I don't know, I'm just some dude on YouTube who made a stupidly long video about Alien Isolation, but to give my personal thoughts on it, I feel like if anyone else tried to touch this kind of game or this series, it would be kind of like if Valve outsourced development of the next Half-Life game to some random studio, because it's not really the concept or the gameplay or the story that made the game great. It's the people that made it. And with those same people spread out all across the gaming industry these days, whichever studio would try and take on the task would have some huge shoes to fill. But I'm alright with that, because I think through a lot of my life, I've had the privilege of playing the classics. By the time I was getting into gaming, a lot of the big series were wrapping up, and I got to play through them, never truly appreciating the miracle that was making multiple damn good games in a series. But these days I've learned to appreciate those one-off experiences as they release, and if Alien Isolation ever gets a sequel or not, I'll be honest, I don't really care, because this is the perfect Alien game, and that's good enough for me, which is why I'm happily setting it down and giving it a rock solid 9 out of 10.
Good video, Brandos. You're really making a good one this time. Unfortunately, you also made a lot of noise. Looking for this? You think I'm so scared of fire, don't you? Well, without this, and he's gone. Looking for this?
Alright, exactly just how much stuff have you stolen from me?
Doesn't matter, because now I'll take everything from you.
Murder, Mr. Moore? Why add another crime to the list? What would be the point when you have already committed the greatest crime of them all? Copyright infringement.
Who are you?
Disney Legal. We received a report of intellectual property theft. And it appears that you are the culprit.
What? Me? No, I'm not a xenomorph, I'm a zonomorph. I'm not infringing on anything. I'm different things entirely.
The mouse disagrees.
Oh, does he? Well, what is Michael Mouse going to do? Send me a cease and desist?
Not quite. Unfortunately, you've been issued a cease to exist.
Oh no! I swear, I can be a good Xeno variant. I'll star in your next shitty mobile game. Anything!
Man, this rescue might have been 3 weeks late, but thanks anyway.
Careful, Mr. Brandos. We have a pending patent for the word thanks. I would hate to have to take legal action against you too. Yes? Ah yes, the Mount House. I've been waiting for the go-ahead on that locally owned family business. I won my way.
That was really intense, guys. Like and subscribe if you want to support my journey to emotional recovery from this incident. Where did all that light go?